The rope cuts into skin that has never known chains. A Nubian teenage girl stumbles forward under the Egyptian sun. Her mouth so dry that swallowing feels like scraping stone against stone. She is 15 years old. The scribes who record her capture will not write her age, her name, or her story. They will write only this: one young female suitable for labor. Behind her walks what remains of her world. Her mother, her aunts, her younger sister, crying without tears left to shed. The year is 1450 BCE. Pharaoh Thutmose III has completed another victorious campaign into Nubia. His temple inscriptions will celebrate thousands of captives taken. But numbers carved into stone do not bleed. This girl is the real cost of Egypt's golden age. Dust coats her skin, mixing with blood from wounds where soldiers pressed and tested her body like merchandise. As she is dragged through Egyptian streets, the crowd does not see a person. They see wealth made flesh, power in chains. Children throw date pits. Women spit. Men evaluate her body with the same cold calculation used for livestock. She does not know that within days she will be sold to a noble estate. She does not know she will spend decades grinding grain until her knees permanently lock into a bent position. She does not know that any children she bears will inherit her captivity. She does not know her bones will be dumped into an unmarked pit. Denied the afterlife Egyptians valued more than life itself. What she knows is thirst, exhaustion, and the certainty that her life ended the moment Egyptian bronze met Nubian shields. This is the part of ancient Egypt that museums rarely show. Ancient Egypt's magnificence was built not only on stone and gold, but on enslaved women whose suffering was erased so completely that we only know they existed through fragments. A mention in a tax record. A skeleton with signs of repeated trauma. A wall relief showing bound women kneeling before pharaohs whose names history remembers. While theirs vanished. During the New Kingdom, conservative estimates suggest nearly a third of Egypt's population lived in some form of slavery. The majority were women. Foreign women captured in war. Local women sold during famine. Children born into bondage who never knew freedom existed. These women ground the grain that fed Egypt. They produced the linen that clothed priests. They labored on monuments admired thousands of years later. Their blood mixed into mortar. Their names disappeared. Egypt did not only enslave bodies. It perfected systems designed to erase identity. War was not just about territory. It was a supply chain for human property. Victory inscriptions proudly listed captured women by the thousands, categorized by origin and age. Young women were valued highest. Pregnant women were considered profitable investments. Elderly women who could not march were often killed on the spot. After capture, women were inspected, sorted, and classified. Domestic labor, field work, temple service, entertainment. Families were separated deliberately to prevent solidarity. Mothers sold away from daughters. Sisters sent to different cities. Children young enough to forget their origins were considered ideal, because memory itself was a form of resistance. The march back to Egypt was designed to break spirits before bodies reached markets. Women were roped together so that one stumble endangered all. Food was minimal. Water was rationed. Egyptian records calculated expected losses during transport as acceptable overhead. Upon arrival, captives were paraded through towns as living proof of pharaonic power. Public humiliation reinforced hierarchy. Locals mocked, insulted, and degraded the women. The message was clear: resistance leads here. Slave markets operated with bureaucratic efficiency. Prices varied by age, appearance, and skill. Women were required to demonstrate abilities that increased value. Weaving, music, languages. Each skill meant a higher price and often deeper exploitation. Sale was not the end. It was the beginning. Daily life for enslaved women was calibrated to extract maximum labor at minimum cost. Before dawn, they began work that destroyed their bodies over years rather than days. Grain grinding alone caused irreversible damage. Kneeling for hours each day, pushing heavy stones, their joints deteriorated rapidly. Skeletons recovered near worker cemeteries show women in their 20s with joint degeneration typical of old age. Water carrying deformed spines. Textile production damaged lungs and skin. Agricultural labor bent backs permanently. Medical care existed only when productivity was threatened. Chronic pain was considered normal wear on property. Violence was not accidental. It was codified. Legal papyri listed acceptable punishments for enslaved people. Beatings, whipping, dangerous labor assignments. Women could be punished for mistakes, perceived disobedience, or simply being within reach of frustration. Some women survived long enough to grow old, too broken to work, too costly to maintain. Many were abandoned, others quietly disposed of. Death was rarely dignified. Sexual exploitation was normalized and rarely named. Egyptian texts did not describe abuse. They described use. Enslaved women could not refuse their owners. Children born from these unions inherited the mother's status. A man could sell his own biological children without consequence. Some women were valued primarily for reproduction. Medical texts described fertility treatments administered not for health, but to increase output. Wombs became production sites. Watching one's children sold was a trauma beyond documentation. Temples and palaces maintained large populations of enslaved women described as ornaments or attendants. Lists recorded them by origin, not by name. These women were property transferred between rulers like furniture. Their lives passed between ownerships. Without choice, public humiliation turned suffering into spectacle. Victory parades, festivals, religious celebrations. Enslaved women were displayed, mocked, and forced into degrading performances that reinforced social order. Children watched and learned who mattered and who did not. Visible markings ensured escape was impossible. Branding, tattooing, shaved heads, scar patterns from specific punishments. The body itself became documentation, ownership written into flesh. Even death did not bring relief. In a civilization obsessed with the afterlife, enslaved women were denied proper burial. Many were dumped into mass pits without ceremony. No grave gods. No names. No rituals. Without these, Egyptians believed the soul could not reach the afterlife. Some women were buried kneeling, as if still serving. Others left exposed to scavengers. The living saw the remains and understood their future. In earlier dynasties, human sacrifice accompanied royal burials. Young enslaved women were killed to serve rulers eternally, later replaced by figurines, but the belief in eternal servitude persisted. Some enslaved women were preserved after death, stored, and buried years later with their masters. Death was not escape. It was continuation. Modern archaeology is finally uncovering these stories. Skeletons tell what inscriptions never did. Knees fused from decades of kneeling. Teeth worn flat from stone dust. Spines crushed under labor. Bodies transformed into evidence. We return to that Nubian girl dragged through dust and chains. Archaeologists would later find her bones near the estate where she spent her life grinding grain. Her skeleton revealed everything Egypt erased. Her age, her labor, her suffering, her endurance. No text recorded her name, but her bones remembered. She was one of millions. And behind every monument we admire today lies a life like hers. Unnamed, unburied, but no longer forgotten. Time passed in Egypt not by years, but by exhaustion. For enslaved women, life was not measured in seasons or festivals, but in how long the body could continue to obey. By the time a girl reached her mid-20s, she was already considered old. Her hands thickened, her spine curved, her face lost the softness that once made her valuable. Beauty faded quickly under hunger and labor, and with it, protection. When productivity declined, cruelty increased. Owners did not see aging as natural. They saw it as failure. A woman who slowed down was punished not to improve her work, but to remind others what awaited them. Pain became a language understood without words. The crack of a whip carried further than any command. Some women attempted escape. Very few succeeded. Egypt was vast, foreign, and unforgiving. Runaways were hunted, recaptured, and publicly punished. Ears cut, feet broken, bodies displayed as warnings. These punishments were not just about control. They were theater, a message burned into flesh for all to see. Even friendships among enslaved women were dangerous. Comforting another could be interpreted as conspiracy. Mothers learned not to show grief when their children were taken. Tears attracted attention. Silence became survival. And yet, resistance never fully died. It survived in whispered songs sung while grinding grain, in stolen moments of rest, in stories passed quietly to children about lands beyond the river, where chains did not exist. These memories were fragile, but they mattered. They were proof that another life had once been possible. The system relied not only on force, but on normalization. Free Egyptians grew up surrounded by enslaved women and accepted their suffering as part of the natural order. Children learned early that some people existed to serve, to be used, and to disappear. Empathy dulled through familiarity. This is how cruelty becomes invisible. As centuries passed, the empire changed, but the machinery of exploitation remained. New pharaohs rose. New temples were built. New wars supplied fresh bodies. The faces changed, the suffering did not. Egypt's stability depended on a constant influx of human labor, and enslaved women remained its quiet foundation. What makes this history difficult is not its distance, but its familiarity. The systems Egypt perfected would echo across civilizations for thousands of years. Capture, transport, dehumanization, labor, sexual exploitation, inheritance of status through the mother, denial of identity, erasure in death. These were not accidents. They were design choices. When we admire the precision of Egyptian engineering, we must remember the hands that bled to achieve it. When we marvel at art and religion, we must acknowledge who was excluded from salvation. When we speak of civilization, we must ask who paid its price. Because progress, when built on silence, leaves ghosts behind. The enslaved women of ancient Egypt left no diaries, no monuments, no names carved into stone. What they left was evidence written into bone, into burial pits, into broken bodies uncovered by chance. They remind us that history is not only written by victors, but also buried with victims. To tell their story is not to condemn the past alone. It is to recognize how easily humanity repeats itself when suffering is hidden behind grandeur. The pyramids still stand. Gold still shines. But beneath that brilliance lies a truth that refuses to stay buried. A civilization remembered as eternal was built on lives considered disposable. And those lives deserve to be seen,